Welcome to today's session. I'm Jessica Hutchison, and my colleague Cecilia and I are going to be speaking about next generation leadership and how we can honor the past while preparing for the future. Before we get started, we both wanted to share a bit about ourselves. So I am a manager at CFAR. I focus primarily in our owner-led business and family enterprise practice, and I am located in Kansas City, Missouri. Prior to joining CFAR, I was a trial attorney with the Department of Labor, where I primarily litigated claims in OSHA, wage and hour, and did a little bit of ERISA work. I also bring a real-time personal view of family businesses. My husband is third generation in a manufacturing business here in Kansas City, and we do have a family council that I am the vice chair on. I'll pass it to Cecilia, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm Cecilia Garza-Madden. I'm also a manager at CFAR. I bring experience leading teams in the nonprofit sector, in higher ed, and in city government. And through my years as a middle manager and an executive leader, I've really become obsessed with how people learn and grow and ultimately realize their full potential. So since joining CFAR, it's been really fun applying that background and lens to the family business context. And it's really great because CFAR has also done a lot of thinking on this topic.
Yeah. So, if we could go ahead and pull up the slides, thank you. So we're excited to spend the next hour with you exploring one of the most critical challenges facing family enterprises today. How do we develop the next generation of leaders, especially in this rapidly changing world? Today, we're going to share some frameworks, discuss some common pitfalls, and give you some practical tools you can take back to your own organizations. And also, and we've already seen this happening now, but throughout the hour, we're going to ask you some questions that you can answer in this chat. So feel free to use it and we'll keep an eye on it. But the first question we wanted to do is hear a bit about you. So if you want to if you haven't already done so, if you want to put in the chat where you're located and what your organization is, that would be great. And while you're putting your location and organization in the chat, we can tell you just a little bit about CFAR. So as many of you probably know, our work traces back to the 80s when we spun out of the Wharton School. And for nearly 4 decades, we've been helping leaders activate their organizations to achieve their highest aspirations. We leverage our academic roots and our clients lead organizations where mission and purpose are critical. We are situated in healthcare, owner-led business, family enterprises, higher education, and some nonprofit entities are who we work with. But enough about us. Cecilia, why don't we jump in and get started?
Yeah, thanks. It's awesome to see people from all over the country. This is really exciting. And this is, we start with hope, hope and energy. And, I'm hoping that most of you logged on today because you also feel a spirit of hope in your approach to next generation development. Next generation development really begins with hope from the leading generation and also is a two-way street. So we have a point of view about next gen development that really has hope at the center. But that hope is hard to come by, and it really requires both a deliberate approach to engaging the next generation, creative collaboration and active commitment across generations, and then I think most importantly, a level of self-awareness from all parties. When we start working with families in this work, it usually starts with really big questions. And across nearly 40 years of experience, we've heard them all. So you may see yourself in some of the examples we're about to share, and please, pop the questions that come to your mind in the chat as well. But one thing we hear a lot of is, maybe you're a third generation family member in a manufacturing business. Your mom grew up in the factory floor watching granddad start the company, but now you're just starting your first internship experience there as a college student. You might be thinking, how am I going to find my place here? How am I going to establish credibility? You might also be thinking, how am I going to make my parents proud? If you're the leading gen, you might be thinking, how is my daughter going to prove herself here? You might be from a company that's almost 100 years old that started out as a small farming business, and now you have a diversified portfolio. You're dealing with farming, real estate development, you've got national product distribution, and things have really expanded. You might be thinking about retirement. You might be thinking about, what are the strategic skills that are going to get us to the next level? That might be a big question on your mind. You might also wonder, like, how am I going to know when the next generation is ready? And if you're part of the leading generation or the rising generation, that is, you might think, how am I going to find my place in such a large enterprise? Another thing that we hear a lot of is from later generations, like fourth gen, fifth gen, who start their career outside the family business. When you're in this situation, it almost always feels like, you've had this amazing experience outside of the family enterprise. Often, you're feeling like you've grown professionally and personally, and maybe you've even fallen in love with a new city that isn't where your home family business is operating. And now you're ready to make a big career move, and you might be thinking to yourself, where's my place in the company? How do I fit into the family business? Do I belong in the operating company? Do I belong on the board? Like, where do I want to take up my role here? And if you're part of the leading gen, you might be thinking, how do we keep our company attractive to G4 and G5? How do we make them want to return when they have these amazing professional experiences outside of the business? So these are just some of the questions that we hear a lot of. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions that are on your mind that you're bringing into the room today. And all of these, yeah, it's great to see everybody's sort of ideas and thoughts in the chat. So thanks for that.
Yeah, yeah. And thanks, Cecilia. I think that's a good intro into if we want to take a step back and kind of talk about the evolution of businesses before we jump into our frameworks. So if we can go to the next slide. So in our work, we see common transitions across generational shifts, and we approach next generation development to meet the moment. So what I want to spend a little bit of time is walking you through some of the evolutionary changes we see from generation to generation. So beginning with the founder stage companies, the focus is often on strategic adaptation and succession. How does this business that's been built by one visionary leader or a founding team transition into something that can outlast them? We're also looking at leadership development and often sibling relationships and multiple family members that are involved. This is also when management and organizational development becomes critical, and families often need to establish their first family council charter. So then when we shift to founder and second generation working together, we're typically designing governance and setting up boards for a growing enterprise. This is when families start thinking seriously about the uses of capital, returns to capital, and assessing risk scenarios. What got you here won't necessarily get you there. When we move into, by the time we reach the second generation of leadership, there are new questions. How do we help the next generation understand the business as an institution and its role in the broader family landscape? Culture becomes explicit rather than implicit, and you have to talk about how do we do things here because it's no longer obvious. We're also building teams that include both families and non-family members, which requires its own skill set entirely. And then there's cohesion, enhancing the glue, if you will, that binds across boundaries. When you have multiple siblings or cousins involved, potentially with different spouses that are involved and different values, how do you maintain that sense of a shared purpose? And by the second and third generations working together, some families face critical decisions. Do we keep the business or do we sell? If we keep it, does it need to be reinvented? What's the rationale for staying together at all? This is also when many families create foundations or family offices, and as organizations with their own purpose and expression of family legacy as developing arenas for growing numbers of next generation members. And for later generation businesses, these questions become even more complex as the family tree expands and the number of stakeholders multiply. And what I really want to amplify is the orange and the gray arrows. So the G2 to G3 transition. As I've sort of highlighted before, in founder to second generation, you have people that are growing up sitting around the same table as siblings and understanding and having a shared culture. And as you sift into the second to third, although there is that overarching family culture, there are more branches, and your cousins all grew up around shared values, perhaps from the founding members, grandma or grandpa, but also have grown up in separate households that have their own values. And so going back to the implicit becoming explicit, that's really important for cohesion and sustainability when we see that.
It's interesting hearing you talk through these different transitions, and particularly that one from G2 to G3, because I think, like, back of the napkin, 40% of our clients are in that G2 to G3 transition.
Yes, exactly, Cecilia. So, thank you. So now here's what's important to understand. As the world around us changes rapidly, the best businesses adapt and evolve as well. This means each generation will have a different experience growing up in and around the business. Think about what's changed in just the last 20 years. The second generation grew up seeing their parents building something. The third generation grew up with that something as an established institution. And the fourth generation is growing up in a world of rapid technological change, social media, and completely different expectations around work life balance, purpose, and corporate responsibility. So, the way we develop our next generation of leaders has to change as a result of that. What worked to develop leaders 30 years ago won't necessarily work today, and what works today might not work in the next 5, 10, or even 15 years. So at CFAR, our approach to working with the rising generation is systemic, focused on how everyone across the family can help. Because here's the truth, this isn't just about the next generation getting ready, it's about the whole system preparing for the transition. So I want to ask you a question that I want you to consider. What do members, those who share the family aspiration, whatever it may be, need to understand, be skilled to do, and have an aptitude for in order to be ready to step into roles that enable continuity, longevity, and durability of the family enterprise across generations? You're probably thinking that's a mouthful, but it is the right question because development isn't just technical skills. It's not just learning the business, it's developing the understanding and capabilities and the orientation needed to steward something bigger than yourself. So I know at this point it could be overwhelming, but next generation leadership development is a shared responsibility requiring active participation from all stakeholders in our family enterprise ecosystem. One of our colleagues at CFAR said something that really resonated with me that it's not you, as a next generation member that is trying to develop, you don't want this to feel like it's happening to you. You want to be an active participant in what's happening. Current businesses and family leaders must create the foundation by providing the skills, building opportunities, sharing legacy values and historical contexts, and establishing formal structures like family councils, while being transparent about their own mistakes. Next generation members cannot be passive recipients, as I was mentioning earlier, but must actively engage by asking questions, seeking development opportunities, and taking calculated risks while also practicing self reflection to demonstrate readiness for increased responsibility. External stakeholders, that is, board members, advisors, and coaches, provide essential outside perspective by facilitating difficult conversations between generations, offering candid feedback, and connecting the family to broader networks, which help and also helps create structured development and succession plans. Success depends on all parties fulfilling their distinct roles while working collaboratively toward the common goal of effective leadership transition. So when we are working with our clients, we have three overlapping work streams. Today, we're going to focus primarily on one, but we think it's important to sort of zoom out a little bit and briefly describe all three so you understand how they fit together. Stream one is engagement. This is about creating meaningful connection between generations, establishing trust, opening channels of communication, and ensuring that the next generation actually wants to be involved. You can't develop someone who doesn't want to be there. Stream three and the orange is deployment. Once people are developed, how do we actually place them in roles where they can contribute and continue learning? How do we create governance structures that actually work? How do we manage the transition of authority and responsibility? Next generation deployment into the business can occur when you've determined ultimate fit and aptitude for the circumstances today and looking ahead to the future. But today we're going to focus on stream two, which is development. Next generation development involves cultivating the skills and capabilities that will serve the enterprise as a family member, an owner, or a manager, including identifying what skills should be developed for this particular time. Getting from engagement to deployment is deliberate, sometimes the overwhelming work of development. So you might ask yourself, what does development look like in this rapidly changing context? Next gen leaders will have to do several things simultaneously, and often these things could feel contradictory. They need to understand the historical elements of your business. Where did you come from? What are the founding values? What made you successful in the past? The historical understanding provides crucial context. But you also need to adapt to the new political, regulatory, and environmental systems. You need to be able to lead and develop a changing workforce across generations. Right now, many organizations have 4 or even 5 generations working together, whether it be the silent generation to baby boomers to Gen Z on down. Each has different expectations, different communication styles, and different values around their work. You need to incorporate emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, automation, data analytics. And then you also need to navigate the global trade policy and other economic shifts.
I think incorporating emerging technologies and trends is so important because we naturally think of AI and other tech tools that are helping us advance in our companies. But really, there are a lot of trends too, like hybrid work, remote work, adaptability that's required for those kinds of trends that are happening in the workforce too.
Yes, I think that's a great point, Cecilia. So let's dig into some additional examples of development challenges you're currently grappling with. It could be something like insufficient P&L responsibility, or maybe you've never worked outside the family business, sometimes what we at CFAR call the golden cage syndrome. They've only known this one environment, say they don't have external benchmarks for what excellence looks like or how other organizations solve problems. It could be limited board or governance experience or a lack of failure and recovery experiences to build resilience. Underdeveloped strategic thinking skills could be missing critical competencies like financial acumen or technical expertise, but no people management experience. And Cecilia, I think you were talking to me a couple weeks ago about that exact thing.
Yeah, we had a client who had a next gen family member who was just a real pro at lean processes and manufacturing, but also didn't have a lot of experience running meetings. And that's something where, you might have some technical expertise, but you're not great at managing people yet because you just don't have that experience.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point because we often talk about the quote unquote hard and soft skills. And I think soft skills are critical to a surviving and thriving business and a good leader. So
Yeah.
um, you could have limited exposure to crisis management or difficult decisions, or you could have a next generation family member who hasn't built the network of industry relationships yet, which is critical to have, again, those outside voices that you can call upon to help make you a better leader. And they're still learning the art of negotiation, whether it's negotiating with suppliers, customers, employees, or each other. Negotiation is a skill that develops over time and with practice.
So that might feel really overwhelming. It's like a big laundry list of skills that need to be developed. So we're going to give you a couple frameworks for thinking about how you can categorize that content and help it feel a little bit more approachable. So one framework that we'll start with is one that I really love, and it's from Robin Hogarth's research on learning environments. So if you've ever read the book Range, this is where I learned about this, and that's a book by David Epstein. So Robin's research, she talks about kind learning environments, which are environments where you get better at the skill through repetition. There are stable rules and repetitive patterns. Experience leads to predictable improvement. Feedback is quick and accurate, and the future can therefore be easily predicted from the past. And then contrast that with wicked learning environments where rules and context may change or be non-existent, patterns don't repeat, experience does not lead to improvement, and in some cases makes you worse. The future is unpredictable because feedback is absent, delayed, or inaccurate. So kind examples would be something like playing an instrument, playing a sport, like you're putting the 10,000 hours in and you're getting better all the time because you're just getting the reps in and you're sharpening your skill set. Wicked, the feedback is incomplete. And so your repetition isn't always going to give you the results that you want. So one of the examples that Robin shares in his research is a really interesting one, and it's about medicine and diagnostic medicine in particular. So this is an area that, like, I think of it naturally as something that's very, very complicated. So the example he shares is about a diagnostician that was so almost perfect at diagnosing typhoid fever. And he would touch the patient's tongue and feel in the patient's mouth and then be able to tell with certainty whether they had typhoid fever even before they exhibited any symptoms. And people wondered, like, how is he accomplishing this? Well, it turns out he was actually a carrier of typhoid fever. He was transmitting it to each and every patient. So that's a situation where a wicked learning environment was being confused for a kind one. And, in that instance is a very dangerous. Hopefully we're not in those kinds of dangerous situations in our family enterprises, but it just sort of goes to show that these kinds of buckets might be hard to tell what's what. So one of the things that I think about when I'm considering whether I'm confusing a wicked learning environment for a kind one is I ask myself some important questions like, is the feedback I'm getting reliable? Is there context that I'm missing, or is there something about this that feels incomplete in the feedback? Managing people, networking, pretty much anything about understanding and interacting with human behavior is going to fall into a wicked category, even if it's something that you're really good at. So like I have managed a ton of people and I've delivered performance feedback time and time again. And so I might make the mistake of thinking that that's a kind skill. And then when I'm trying to skill someone up in that element, I might mistake that for kind and be impatient because they're not learning it as quickly. But it's a really, really tough skill. It's hard to do. Um, and there are, situations where you might also confuse a kind skill for a wicked skill. So situations like that, I think, come into play when there's a lot of risk involved. And in particular, uh, you might be careful about thinking about something as a kind skill if you have some reputational risk or financial risk involved in training somebody in that area. Another thing before I share an example about that I want to highlight about this kind of range of learning environments is that some people are really good at teaching kind skills, really good at like training you how to throw a free throw, for example, really good at that repetition work. Some people are also really good at teaching the wicked types of skills. And that's really where you need experimentation, reflection, and processing in order to get better at those skill sets. So you need a teacher who's really got the patience for that. So that's something I think important to consider when you're thinking about developing your next generation and creating plans. Who is not just how the learner is learning, but who's doing the teaching. And now I want to sort of share a quick example about mistaking a kind learning environment for a wicked one. And this is, we just threw a bunch of theoretical content at you. So now we're going to think about sports for a minute. And I love bringing in sports examples because not just because I love sports and they're fun, but because there's so much teaching and learning and coaching that happens in sports. So if you are a baseball fan, this is a good case for you. And also, if you have seen the movie Moneyball, you might already accidentally know about this. So, or read that book. And feel free to put in the chat, your favorite baseball team. We're in playoffs right now. So, I'm missing my Phillies games, but so this is a story about the case of Scott Hatteberg. And if you don't know who Scott Hatteberg is, he is a baseball player. He played in the major leagues in the late 90s and early 2000s. He was a catcher. He was a catcher who had a really high on-base percentage. In particular, he walked a lot, but he just had a very good statistic of getting on base. He had a bum elbow, and so that pretty much makes you obsolete as a catcher, for those who are less familiar with the game. And so he was a very undesirable player. And during this period in time, the Oakland Athletics were trying to rebuild their team. They had lost a ton of their talent. They had lost one of their biggest hitters and biggest stars in their first baseman, Jason Giambi. And so the manager of the A's thought, I am going to go after Scott Hatteberg and we're going to teach him how to play first base. He is going to solve part of our problem in the offensive lineup. And what could be simpler, right? So this to me is really actually a case of mistaking or thinking about the skill of first base as whether it's a kind skill or a wicked skill. Billy Beane, the manager, really thought it was a kind skill. Like, how hard can it be? The first base coach thought, no, it's incredibly difficult. He is like, this is a wicked skill set. There's no way I'm going to teach this kid how to play first base. Scott Hatteberg, when they approach him, who is shocked because, again, he can't really throw the ball. He is an undesirable player. He's shocked that the A's want him, and he is skeptical and terrified. He's like, I've never played first base before. So the manager says, you know, don't worry about it. We're going to teach you. And he's also worried. He's like, you know, the fans are going to be pretty upset if they don't see Jason Giambi out there and they see me, a nobody. And the first base coach kind of jokes like, you know, well, if teaching, you know, he's like, what about the fans, right? The first base coach, you know, is thinks out loud, you know, if it's so easy to learn first base, maybe I'll teach one of the fans, right? So these is a perfect example, I think, of two different people interpreting a skill set differently. And what ends up happening in the case of Scott Hatterberg is that he is trained to play first base. They put him in the lineup. It takes him some time to get there, but he ends up playing for a handful of years for the A's. And by the time he leaves, he is most desirable to the next team he plays for as a defensive first baseman. So I love this example just because it is a great one. And how many times have we been in situations ourselves where we're afraid to teach someone something new, or they're afraid to learn, and you have convinced yourself that the task is more difficult than it is. So that's just one example sort of that sort of tension around whether something is kind or wicked. So if you think about that example and think about other examples that might be coming to mind as you reflect on what are the kinds of skills that are needed in your next generation of leadership, think about what are the kind skills, what are the kinds of things that can be developed and sharpened via repetition. Really want to hear what your ideas are in the chat and how you're thinking of that. You saw that long list of skills that are required for emerging leaders in the context that we're in today. And then of course, like the whole slew of skills that are, you know, required regardless of where we are at any point in time. Which of these kinds of skills are wicked? Which ones are going to require more experimentation to learn and less repetitive kinds of teaching to get better at them?
Yeah. And if people want to take a minute to think about both of those, there's always two examples I point to when I'm thinking about the difference between sort of kind skills and wicked skills. And, you know, keeping with the sports reference, and I love the Royals call out, go Royals. But as far as kind skills, Steph Curry, obviously the amazing NBA player, he has a ritual after every practice that he is going to shoot 10 free throws, and five of which have to be swishes, and they all have to be in a row before he's done. That would be an example of a kind skill, and also an example of what led him to be so successful in his career. On the other hand, a wicked skill, and continuing that sports reference, if anybody's ever played sports growing up or in college, you know, you get into halftime or at the end of the quarter, and maybe you're not performing as well as your team would like to. And great coaches know how to say just the right thing to bring brevity to the situation, but also motivate you to go out there and do better in the second half or the next quarter or what have you. And that is more of a wicked skill. And it's them using, you know, the self-awareness of who they are and what they bring to the table and channeling that. And certainly you can look at that and you can learn from them, but you really have to make it your own. And you have to have, and that involves experimentation. So those are two ways to think about either of those. So.
Yeah, I think another example is sort of just before we move into the next framework, like knowing when to break the ice in a tense meeting, like that's something that no amount of practice is really gonna make you sharp at that, and you can't sort of emulate what you see someone else doing. It just really is more of a craft. It's a little more complicated and more in that wicked bucket.
Yeah. And
So yeah, go ahead.
I did want to call out someone in the chat wrote wicked isn't exactly bad. And I think that's a really good point to amplify and clarify.
Yeah,
They're just different. So thanks for sharing that.
totally. So you might be thinking like, okay, a lot of the skills that are on my list of things I want to develop are going to require more experimentation than repetition. So the next framework we're going to talk about kind of gets a little bit more into that. And so here's a framework for thinking about these tensions. And this one is from developmental psychology, and it's called the explore exploit trade-off. So this is first we'll sort of describe what exploit is, which is using what we already know and do well and drilling down. This can be a risk-averse mode of learning. It thrives on anticipating rewards and external feedback. it can lead to quicker learning because the feedback is predictable and quick, and also can reduce uncertainty. So a small, tiny example I like to give of this, and hopefully others will come to mind as I'm explaining this one, but when my daughter was an infant, my mom quickly learned that she could roll a lemon off the side of the table and then pick it up before it hit the ground. And my daughter would squeal with delight and just giggle her face off. And so my mom would repeatedly roll that lemon off the table, and every single time my daughter Rachel would squeal with delight, right? And how many times have we interacted with a small child that way? And I'm sure many of you are in large families and have played with babies before, right? So this is hopefully relatable. But once you have pleased the baby, like you want to keep doing that thing until it doesn't work anymore. And that's a very gratifying experience, right? So you're getting that quick external feedback and then you're doing it repeatedly. Um, Explore mode is more looking for new knowledge and experiences, showing up when guidance and certainty is sparse. It's driven by curiosity and intrinsic motivation, so not those external rewards. And therefore, learning can take a little bit longer when you're in this mode. So back to kids, this is exactly what it sounds like. Kids are notoriously unfocused, unable to make long-term plans, need regular supervision to make good choices. This makes them really bad at behaving, but really, really good at exploration and discovery. So one thing to think about when you're thinking about these two modes is that when you're in exploit mode and you're drilling down, you may unintentionally abandon explore mode. So a daily example of this that I like to that I just immediately think of is coffee. So if I know I'm getting ready in the morning and I'm running late, I don't have time to make my coffee at home, I know exactly where on my commute I can get off the train, walk a block, get a hot, good, cheap, reliable cup of coffee. I know the line is short and the coffee is good. I know exactly how much it costs. I don't have to pull up a map. I don't have to think about if I have, what I need. It is like clockwork. I either make my coffee at home or I go to this one spot and get my coffee. Um, I, when that coffee shop was renovated last year, I had to rethink my exploit behaviors, and I had to cast a wider net, and I had to see where is the good coffee around here. And turns out there are a lot of other coffee shops that are very nearby, but I had to try multiple coffee shops before I found the one that like, okay, this is good coffee. This is exactly, I know that the line is going to be reasonable. And turns out I found an even better coffee spot that's just down Market Street instead of down 17th, for those of you who've been to our office. And I would have never found that coffee shop if I didn't get forced into being out of exploit mode and have to move into explore mode. So just a tiny daily life example. And there are tons of other ways that this framework is applied. I think about gaming and the development of AI. And this is something that Alison Gopnik, who is an artificial intelligence researcher and developmental psychologist, is applying when she is working with teams that are developing AI agents to play games. When they have a simple game and they have an AI agent that's programmed with too much curiosity, it will actually fail at the game. It's spending way too much time exploring and not just doing the easy task of the game. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Necessity is the mother of invention or exploration. And foraging animals do this. That's a very easy example. They're often going to one resource of nourishment, and then once that is depleted, then they will continually go to that resource until it's depleted, and then they have to go back into explore mode to find something new. Bumblebees, researchers have actually like tracked individual bumblebee flight patterns, and they have found that young bumblebees spend a ton of time in explore mode and less time in exploit mode. And once they identify like what the pattern is that they need to fly to get to the best sources of nectar, then they go into exploit mode, and they have these extremely efficient flight patterns that they follow, and they're like very tight patterns that take them from one source of nectar to the next. And so it's just really fascinating. Later in life, in a bumblebee's lifespan, they're spending a ton of time in exploit mode because they've gotten really good at developing those flight patterns really efficiently. And it's really interesting and like amazing, but they never ever move out of explore mode. Like they're always at some point revisiting explore mode. So yeah, it's really a behavioral dilemma that occurs anytime our need for information is in conflict with our desire for reward. So that's why some of these examples are really about like winning games or eating food or drinking coffee.
Yeah. And well, and it's along those lines, another real world example is when me and my husband are dealing with the dreaded question of what's for dinner tonight. And we might not want to be cooking dinner. And so we will DoorDash or Uber Eats something. And I always like to operate in exploit mode and I stick with what I know. And I have my go-to places that I like to eat. But my husband will push me into explore mode and he'll be like, why don't we try this new thing? You know? And so it's great. Sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. And then there's another place that we really like that we can then add to our repertoire of what we're gonna eat when we're too busy to cook. So again, just both of these serve a purpose, and going back and forth is the best way to really optimize knowledge and understanding and growing. So.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. And so now that we've sort of taken our thinking outside of the family business context, now let's put ourselves back in the next gen development context, right? What can explore and exploit look like in our businesses? For exploit mode, we've got a number of ideas that fall into this category. So deepening your existing knowledge about the current state of the business, teaching the next generation how things work now, why certain processes exist, what the current competitive advantages are. Another one is leveraging existing relationships. So we really think this is important, like because you might think of relationship building as something that's more in the explore mode, but if you have current relationships, leveraging those, introducing next gen to longstanding partners, that's a way of exploiting what you have at your disposal and really making sure that you don't deny that connection. Understanding areas of clear competitive advantage, thinking about, what does our company do better than anyone else, and why do customers choose us? What would be dangerous to change is a good question here. We want to create and teach from manuals for standard operating procedures. So there's a lot of stuff that can be documented, and then you can use that documentation to really train quite simply. And that's probably some skills that are in the kind bucket. And it really helps you just get good practice and know what are the right procedures, what are the things where there is a right and there is a wrong. I mean, we don't want a lot of exploration here. Creating apprenticeship programs, great way of having next gen work alongside experienced leaders, learning by doing in a structured way. And then, of course, developing curriculum with clear performance metrics. So even if it's not an SOP, you can still have curriculum and still have guidelines and benchmarks for what does it mean to succeed in learning these competencies. Curious if folks have other ideas, and we'll certainly take your questions at the end, but feel free to, like, if your ideas are being sparked, feel free to put those in the chat too. Would love to see them. In explore mode, we're thinking some approaches here would be, again, if we go back to the curriculum idea and, trying new and novel approaches, right? Like maybe you had your curriculum developed 7, 8 years ago, it's time for a refresh. That's really a way of going into explore mode and refreshing that. You want to also try mini experiments. This is a great way to test ideas with minimal risk and test skill set and competency with minimal risk. Avoid that Scott Hatterberg situation where you're really reluctant to try. Just try something small, let someone build a draft of the budget and then, test it and have them work alongside somebody. We understand there's lots of areas where the risk is high, but just trying a mini experiment can help get the toe wet. Bringing in new voices and ideas into the mix and broadening your network is a great way to put yourself in explore mode. If you are a person who doesn't feel like explore mode really resonates with you, you could really do nothing more than just invite new and original voices into the mix and listen to them and take in what they're saying. That's a great way to just sort of push your thinking forward. In particular, having family members learn from non-family members, learn from industry experts, from academic partners or peer networks. This is a great way to go in explore mode. We have a lot of things here. I think enlisting independent board directors and non-family leaders to lead education efforts can be really helpful. It sort of depersonalizes that family element of things too. And also they're drawing on experiences that don't come from within the family enterprise. So that's a way to bring in explore mode as well. Encouraging innovation labs where the next generation can experiment with new ideas without threatening the core business. That's a great one. Offering external rotations where next gen leaders spend time working in other organizations or other contexts in partnerships. So those can be really powerful partnerships and opportunities to go learn new things and then bring them back to the original context. Try reverse mentoring programs. This can be really, really great, in particular with new technologies, new market trends, new ways of thinking about stakeholder engagement, increasing use of AI. This is something that, we can't ignore, and I think is a great example of going into explore mode and figuring out what are the right ways that you're going to, figure out how you're going to implement that into your work streams. I
Yeah.
think, Jessica, you were telling me about how this is something that your husband's company is dealing with directly right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the increasing use of AI and then your the point just prior to that and trying reverse mentoring. I think everybody is grappling with how to incorporate AI in the most effective way in their organizations. But I was talking to my husband and he is a rising gen in his operating company and I had talked to him about some of the ways we're incorporating AI and he thought it would be something really good and beneficial to bring back to his organization. And he was a little bit struck when some of the leading generation, so Gen 2 in his case, was just a little bit hesitant for it to incorporate AI, didn't really understand, the full breadth of what it can do, but also understanding the risk mitigation that can be there if you do it properly. And so to me, this was a case of him being able to show them how they can use it effectively. And it took a little bit of time, but over the course of a couple months, now they are using it in incredible ways that's very much making their work more efficient. And so I think that's just a testament to this sort of back and forth development and that it's not just the next gen that you're developing, it's everybody in the business that you're developing.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think we talked about refreshing curriculum that was previously developed already. That's a great way of putting in new and novel approaches to your training and learning environments. And then, of course, bringing in coaches. It's another way of having third party give perspective. So that's pretty great. Um, so as you think about these ideas, we want to just make the point that striking the right balance can be challenging. We know that. And if you stick with only what you know, you're not going to get very far. So in businesses, sometimes we can put a premium on knowing and gravitate towards leaders who project certainty and confidence. And while animals explore by instinct, we may have been trained or conditioned to ignore this instinct, developing bad habits and then getting stuck in a rut. We want to move into explore mode when it's necessary to ensure the information about our environment doesn't become stale. So think about exploring something new and exploiting what you know as like a cycle. It's something that it's not really like a continuum where you're doing one or the other. It's not either or, but more like a continuous cycle of learning and growing and developing. Businesses like ecosystems change constantly, and leadership and how we develop leaders has to adapt to stay competitive. Some common pitfalls. So as you're thinking about this, one thing that we see is framing generational value clashes as an either or good, bad, and thinking, or even thinking exploit bad, explore good, right? Or leading gen bad, rising gen good, or vice versa. We don't want to, that's an either or that's not really helpful to us, right? And then I think confusing explore mode with recklessness is also a common pitfall. So I think the example that Jessica shared about ordering dinner, her husband wasn't trying to be reckless. He's just trying to try something new. So that might be a question that you can ask yourself if you have someone in your family system that you feel is in explore mode too often. Like, are they being reckless or are they just trying to order from a different place, Um, and I think another big pitfall can be mistaking exploit mode for stagnation. In particular, you want to be cautioned against this, I think, because we have a lot of experts around us and we don't want to minimize that expertise. We want to honor that wisdom. You don't want to alienate folks that are really, really excellent at particular skill sets. So it might be a skill set that is has been time tested and true, and you want to learn from that. So really, we just put some of these pitfalls here because it might be easy to think of those in the either or kind of frame, and we really want to try to avoid them.
Yeah, and I just want to put a finer point on this, Cecilia, too, that, the generational classes kind of mistaking exploit mode for stagnation, back to what you had said about honoring the wisdom, a lot of the leading generations necessarily had to be in explore mode, or else they wouldn't have been successful. So I think that's a prime example that it's not always generationally divided, and it's just leveraging what you have, again, to grow your organization. Oh.
Yeah, great point. And it's a two-way street.
Mhm.
Some questions for you to consider. How do you know when you would benefit from being in explore mode versus exploit mode? How can you integrate habits and practices into your next gen development activities to balance both modes? And how can you build more reflection and rethinking old approaches in your work? Curious if ideas come to mind as you're thinking about this trade-off here.
Well, and while we're all thinking about that, because there'll be some time for question and answers and overall thoughts, we can sort of summarize what we've talked about, and then we'll leave some room to have some discussion or answer some questions. So, just to summarize, we talked about the challenging questions that emerged across generations when contemplating next gen development. And at the top of the hour, we talked about all three streams for effective next generation leadership. And stream one is engagement. Again, we need to make sure everybody is involved. To Cecilia's point earlier, this isn't just a two-way street, but really leveraging everybody in the business to the extent necessary to make the best decisions for your business at the particular point that you're looking at this. Deployment is really key to be able to deploy these next generation members. But what we talked a lot about today is stream two, which is development, and that's where we've been focusing our time on. We start and we build from engagement, but without development, we can't properly deploy our next generation members to be active stewards of the business.
We offered some frameworks for thinking about skill development across generations, and we gave you some techniques and ideas to apply these frameworks to your next gen development work. So we talked about the spectrum of learning environments from kind to wicked, being kind being more repetitive and wicked being more experimental and based on feedback and taking that delayed feedback in and processing it. And we also talked about the explore exploit trade-off and thinking about that more like a cycle of how you approach your learning and exploiting what you know, drilling down, then exploring something new. The truth is, the most successful family enterprises don't choose between tradition and innovation. They master the art of both. You're probably feeling the tension between these two all the time, and you're probably navigating them both beautifully. Hopefully, the tips and tools and ideas we share today help you think about this really hard work in a refreshed way. Want to pause here. So I think we have about 10 minutes left in our time, but we can take some questions. And I think we actually have one more slide before we take questions. Yeah.
Well, and perhaps most importantly, what does hope look like in your family? It starts with hope, as we talked about at the top of the hour. Do you have it? How do you nurture it? Because remember, this work must begin with hope. And we know this work isn't easy. If it were easy, every family business would successfully transition across generations. Some of the data tells us that some don't make it past the second generation, and fewer make it to the third and the fourth. The families that do succeed are the ones that take this work seriously, invest in development, and have honest conversations across generations that remain adaptable as the world changes around them. And just remember, development is a constant process that doesn't end for all involved.
So true. So what questions do you all have? I think we have time to take a few if you have them.
Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie.
And I guess a question to you all, are anybody in is anybody currently working on development plans or developing next generation leadership, and feeling some of these tensions?
Oh, thanks, Hakeem.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is great, Travis. Yeah, just reading a
Yeah.
comment from the chat, the current baby boomer generation might seem extremely slow to transition power across industry and enterprise organizations and, of course, government. I think this is always going to be a tension. And right now, because it's baby boomers that are at the end of their career, like when Gen X becomes at the end of their career, we're probably going to see the same thing, so I'm cautious to just sort of put baby boomers in a negative light. It's hard to make that transition, and particularly for founders, like this is something really precious. And so it's definitely a balance. It can be frustrating, but we support families with leadership transitions all the time, specifically because it's such challenging work.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is, I mean, I know you mentioned baby boomers, but also we see in some of our families where the generation before them are the ones that are which is the
Yeah.
could founding generation, and they're staying into it. So not only are the baby boomer generation sort of waiting to take the helm of it, and so on, and so then you have Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z. So we certainly see what's happening outside family enterprises, reflected in the family enterprise, and sometimes a little bit more amplified. So, um,
And then I see a question here about like going after another degree. And Amy, I think this is a great idea. And even if you're not going to get rewarded, in quotes, I like that you have it in quotes there for your effort. If you feel like that's a skill set that's going to help you advance in the family enterprise, go for it. Right. I mean, that's my 2 cents here, right? Like I think getting smarter, getting more education is a great thing to do. And, it will take some time to prove yourself and prove that that was an endeavor that is adding value to the business. But, I think it's relatable that you could be discouraged by that. But, if you need a little boost, I say go for it.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to highlight Lisa's point. We work with a family um who they own a bank, and part of our work was getting them to come together. That was sort of the first phase of our work. And now it's really having a curriculum plan that will help them eventually be stewards of this bank. And so to your point about engagement, originally what we helped them create is an overarching set of what would it take for them to be stewards in the business, and eventually some could be sitting on the board or what have you, and so we put that together. But then for each of the 9, we then drilled down and said, what's your individual curriculum plan, and what are the types of things that you are compassionate about and want to be engaged in? And obviously with some of just the regular curriculum things that we've identified in the larger complex context, but really giving them where it's like a shared development plan. So they feel like they're getting out of it what they want and keeping them engaged, but also making sure they hit these milestones. So if and when they are prepared to step into the business, they can do that.
Awesome. I think we saw all of these questions. Yeah, walking a line between providing quality education to the team and running into a stated desire for the program, but lack of engagement once it's released. That's a tough one, Lisa. I think that's really tough. And we have a lot of work that we do with engagement in particular, which is like in those overlapping work streams really precedes development because you want people to really be bought in. But of course, that's your question perfectly highlights that it's an overlapping thing, right? Once you're in the development stream, engagement might wane. So yeah, curious to follow up with you and maybe offline in a separate conversation about that.
Yeah. And Karen, I think that's a great point. And some of the ways we help some of our next gen members is going to things like family business, like transition conferences, or places where they can see people that are grappling with some of the same things they are in their family businesses, and giving them a network of people to call upon. And I think that just helps to make for more well-rounded a more well-rounded rising generation.